Hey everyone, Dennis Cortez here. I'm a designer who codes, teaches, and makes music. In today's video, I'm going to be going over how I work with variants and auto layout to make really powerful actions/buttons in Figma. So I've made a couple videos on the basics of auto layout and how I create variants within them, but there's been a lot of progress from Figma's end on how auto layout actually works and a lot of the variant group items that you can work with. I think there's a lot of powerful updates that I wanted to highlight in terms of how I use it on my day-to-day work and how I build design systems around this new functionality. Just a quick plug, I do have a Patreon, so if you're interested in getting these videos early, I post them there a couple days early typically, and I also post behind the scenes of these videos, and I post extra projects that I'm working on outside of YouTube. So if you want to stay up to date on those, feel free to check it out at patreon.com/shyboytm, or you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Both of them are at shyboytm. I also make music, so check those out. There's a link in the description as well if you're interested. So first off, what are variants? Variant and variant groups are a feature that Figma introduced just a bit ago that in my opinion is a way to simplify design system assets and adding ways to add parameters to each of those so that you can swap things out without having to make different instances for each one. Instead, you can just have one powerful component, and if you do it right, you're actually able to make your workflow for you and your team so much easier if you do this the right way. And secondly, what is auto layout? I'm going to read the description straight from Figma. So they say that auto layout is a property you can add to frames and components. It lets you create designs that grow to fill or shrink it and reflow as their content changes. This is great when you need to add new layers, accommodate longer text strings, or maintain alignment as your designs evolve. So in my opinion, auto layout is super powerful and I use it on almost everything. When it comes to product design, speed and optimizing your workflows is super important. So at scale, auto layout is one of the main foundations of design systems that will really help you get to that level. So what we're gonna do in this video is I'm actually gonna show you an example of what I've made at work, and then I'm gonna actually build something similar with you all so that you all can build it yourself and you can follow along and hope that it will be helpful for you so that you can see how I actually go about doing this. So this is the button that I made for the mothership design system when I was working there. And this button actually has a lot of parameters, as you can see over here on the right. We have 4 here that we can look at. We have size, type, icon left, and icon right. And as you can see, there's actually ways to do both drop downs and toggles. So this is helpful for when you have certain parameters that only need to be on or off, and then versus something that needs a drop down because it has multiple selections. So for the size, for example, this one button can actually do a lot of changes in terms of this. You can change the size, you can change the type, you can do all that. You can even add icons if you need to, and then I could go in here and actually change out these icons for something else if I wanted, and then having my color system set up, I can change those out. So what's cool about this when you're using auto layout is, as you saw with the icon, it actually fills the space based on what the contents are, and that works for the button text as well. So for this one, because it's a destructive button, let's say we want to cancel order. So we can actually type out cancel order in here and it resizes based on the text that we put in there. So as you can see at scale, when you're actually building buttons out like this, you get to use them in so many different ways. And it's very scalable as in terms of you only have to maintain this one component. So if we take a look at how the actual variant groups work, so we have this main action one here that has all of the different variations that you can have within the system that we developed and what our needs were for our specific product. So obviously that'll be different for you, but we're gonna go ahead and try and build something similar to this. So I'm gonna go ahead and open a new document and let's go ahead and get started. So the way that you're gonna start off with this is we're gonna make the button first. So you just need text. We're gonna go ahead and make the text say button. So for this example, I'm gonna use 16 for the size of the button. So I can go ahead and change this out here. Let's use a different typeface. So you can go ahead and use whichever one is fit to your brand, but I'm gonna go ahead and use this one just for practice. And then I'm gonna change this button to white because we're gonna have a darker background here. So I'm gonna go ahead and add auto layout at this point. So because this isn't a frame, you're not seeing the auto layout on the right, but if you were to put this within a frame, you would see that auto layout option appear here. But just a quick tip is actually if you have text and you just hit Shift A, you can create auto layout based on that. So now this already gives me the option here. I like to use 12 for my spacing between items, but it's up to you what you want to use. So for now, let's go ahead and add a fill for the background so that we can actually see it. So I'm going to go ahead and use just this default blue from Figma. So going over some of the auto layout functionality, you actually see here, this is the spacing between your items, this is the padding around your items, and then you can go ahead and customize each of the alignment and padding in this menu here. So one thing to point out is this last one, so you can do space between. It's not super helpful for buttons because we want hug contents for a lot of the use cases that we're using, but just a heads up that there is space between, which in web development terms is basically like justify the space between so that they're at the ends versus packed together. So for this example, we're gonna go ahead and use packed. So for the padding, I'm gonna go ahead and change this, and I'm gonna use 16 on top. Then I can just tab through each of these and just go to the next one so I don't have to use my mouse to click on each one. And I'm going to do that. It's also worth mentioning that you can change the entire padding for an auto layout frame on this selection here. So if I type 16 in here, it'll set everything to 16, but because this is a button, you typically want the top and bottom padding to be less than the sides. So we're going to go ahead and use what I put on before. And let's go ahead and add some border radius just so we can get some styling in here. I'm gonna go ahead and just use 4 for my example. You can go ahead and use whatever is great for your brand. And then I'm gonna set this line height to 20. I like to use that for 16. And then let's go ahead and rename this to button. So I just did Command R there on Mac so that I can go ahead and just rename it real quick. And then I have my button here. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add an icon to this before we get started with making variants. So I just grabbed this from another file, but feel free to either make your own or grab one from a website resource that you have. And I'm gonna go ahead and resize this to, let's do 16 so that we're matching this. And then if you click on the top frame of this button, so what we were working with before, you can go ahead and see the alignment here. So that's where this comes into play. As you can see, this arrow is actually not aligned vertically with the text, and that's because of this selection here. So we're gonna go ahead and actually change this to centered aligned. And after that, we have it centered horizontally, so we can go ahead from there. So I recommend adding an icon on both the right and the left, one for labeling and one for an action item that you're working on. But for my example, I'm just gonna use one on the right just to keep it simple. You're gonna go ahead and make what I like to call your base component. So this is important because if you actually go straight into making variants of this, then when you want to make updates to each one, you're going to have to go through one by one and make each of the updates. Whereas if you actually include this step, then you only have to edit one of them. I'm just going to make 2 copies for this one just for example's sake. So go ahead and duplicate this one twice. And then now we have 2 separate variants that we can use for this. And we're going to keep this one separate. We're gonna go ahead and select each of those duplicates that we just made and make them each their own component. We'll go ahead and make multiple components, and then you're gonna see this option here on the right that comes when you select 2 different base components. So we're gonna combine these as variants. Quick tip here is right when you make your variant group, I suggest adding auto layout. So I just did that by doing Shift A, and what this does is it helps you move things around so that you're not having to organize them constantly, because the base one actually doesn't add auto layout. So for your variant groups, you have to manually move things around. So just a quick tip there. So now that we've done this, I'm gonna start adding data to the variant groups so that we can start sectioning them out and having them for drop downs for data that we can add to them. So for the first example, I want to go ahead and make both a primary button and a secondary button. So let's go ahead and leave the blue for our primary button, but the secondary one, we're going to go ahead and change out the background color. And let's do like a dark gray. So now that we have that and we select the variant group, you can actually see that we have a default property that's added to it. But what we want to do for this button is actually go ahead and start sectioning. So the first one that I like to do is called type. That's how I reference it. And type basically references whether it's a primary or a secondary button, or if you have a tertiary, destructive, etc. So we're gonna go ahead and just add the types here. So let's do primary. And then this one will actually have a different one. So you can go ahead and select each of them and actually add the new addition within this input field. So when I go ahead and I type it in here, it automatically adds it as a second type to here. So let's make a third one now so that we can have a destructive button as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and select anywhere on this variant, and then I'm gonna press this plus button in the bottom right. And this will duplicate the top level component that you made. And then we have a new type here. So it actually lets you input on the type immediately. And we're gonna call this one destructive, like I said earlier. So this one, we're gonna change the color because we want it to be more of a warning one. So we're gonna go with the red that Figma gives us. So now that we have that, we wanna add these different variations for whether or not we want an icon. So the way that we do that is we're actually gonna select each of these. And this is how I like to do this, where I just do Command D and it just basically makes duplicates of each one of those. And now I have 2 of each one. And for each of these, we want to add whether the button is going to have an icon or not. So this is where the toggles come into play. So the way that you can make a toggle is you actually add a new property. So you select the variant group, you go over here, you press add new property, and we're going to do icon right. So for this, like I said earlier, I recommend doing icon left, and then you would just name the other one icon left, of course. And then the default, we're actually gonna change it to on. So a quick tip here is if you want a toggle UI for each of these, you gotta make sure you only have 2 values. And I believe the ones that you're allowed to use is on and off, or yes and no. So if you add those as the parameters, it actually automatically creates a toggle for you within the UI of Figma, which is nice. So we have the default one as on. So we're gonna make the variance of each one where it's off. So basically what I'm gonna do is select each one of these second ones, so the duplicates that we just made, and then I'm actually gonna delete each of these, which won't actually delete them, it will just hide them, and then it actually hugs the contents based on this component that we made at first. So now we have different variations for that, and we're gonna change the values for these. So the default value, as you saw that we made, is icon right is on. So for these, we're gonna go here and do icon right is off. So as you can see, we have the on and off now, and we have these extra types here. So the way to get rid of the extra types is you just select those duplicates that we had, and we're actually gonna set them to the default ones that we use. So this one's primary, this one here would be secondary, and then this third one would be destructive. And then as you can see, that automatically will just remove whichever ones you're not using. So now that we've done that, we can actually drag in this button component just to show you all how it looks actually in practice. So now we just have this drop down, really easy to use, and then we can turn the icon on or off. So let's actually expand this a little bit more and add a disabled state. So the way that this works is gonna be very similar to what we did with the icons. I'm just gonna select each of these within here, and you're gonna do Command D to duplicate them. And now you have all these separate ones that you need to make. But the cool thing about these is I can actually just set these to disabled and then add the parameter later. So the way that I set them to disabled is I actually do 50% opacity when I'm working with them. So that's an easy way to just have a way to actually code this pretty easily and implement the disabled styling. And it's scalable because you're actually just using opacity versus trying to figure out actual hex codes. So I'm gonna go ahead and select each of these duplicates that I made and just set the opacity to 50. And the way I'm doing that is just by pressing the 5 on your keyboard, and that'll automatically set opacity to 50. So now we have each of these as a disabled state as well. So now that we've done that, we're actually gonna go ahead and add that variant property here. So I'm gonna do add property, and then we're gonna do disabled. And then the same way we did with the icon. In this case, I'll show you the yes and no example, just because it's a bit more contextual for disabled buttons. So we're gonna do disabled as yes, and the default for those would be the ones that are actually disabled. There's actually a warning telling you that some of the variant properties are actually matching, which is really cool because then you make sure that you don't have like overlap of the same component, because then you'll run into a lot of issues there. But once we go ahead and add the no to disabled, you'll see that goes away because now we actually don't have any overlap there. But we have overlap for each of these, the ones that aren't disabled. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the ones that aren't disabled, and in the drop down, I'm just gonna say no. So now, once we go to this actual component here, you can actually do disabled as well. So we can go ahead and swap out to secondary, go ahead and disable that or enable it if we want. And then now you already have just one button that already has so much functionality. And you can get really complex with these, like a lot of different variants that I've done, especially with like custom components. There's ways that you can hide certain elements of a complex component, or you can collapse different states. And if you're using that in combination with auto layout, then it'll automatically collapse to the container that you have and the contents within it. So now with this, we're left with a really powerful button that you can go ahead and actually expand on this more. So depending on the product that you're working on and the goals of that product, you can actually add a lot more as well. So like the example I showed at the beginning, we actually had icons on both the left and right, and we actually had different sizes for each too. So if you wanted, you can actually make a different size, do the same thing, and actually have that be like a base component, and then you can add those to this button variant group, and then you can have the parameter of like a small and a large or whatever different sizes you need, and then you can use those. And then just easily with the drop down, you just have the button asset that you drop in, then you can go ahead and drop down to the size that you need and any of the other parameters that you want to do. So I hope this video was helpful and let you kind of see what you can do with variant groups and auto layout. And I encourage you to experiment with it, try out things on your own, try out some different things that are specific to your product, and try and implement this within your design system, because as you can see, it can be really powerful and really helpful for speeding up your workflow when you're working with teams and with design systems. If you have any questions or there's anything that I may have missed in this video, be sure to leave it in the comments below so that we can go ahead and kind of learn from that. Maybe you have some tips for auto layout and variants that I may have missed, or your team just does it differently than this, then I'd love to know, and maybe you can share it with everybody so that we can go ahead and learn from each other in that way as well. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to this video. I can see in the analytics a lot of people are watching the videos but aren't subscribing, which I totally get. I do that as well, but I would really appreciate it if you did. It helps the channel out a lot and helps me grow and kind of support me to make more videos for you all. So I appreciate all the support, and thanks so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoy it, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.